Welcome to a new video. Let's take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. The first story is called, "You Want to Cut My Pay?" This happened around 2008 when the economy went down hard. I was working in a small electric and computer lab, where we build some very high-end video computing product. I was the assistant manager in the computer lab because I was the most experienced guy in the lab. Basically, there was no problem I didn't see before and couldn't solve, while the rest of my crew were mostly beginners. The economy went down hard, but this business didn't suffer much. There are not that many people who know how to handle dedicated hardware in a dedicated field. So we were not too worried about our job. However, our CEO Richard thought it was a great opportunity to save some money. First, he fired almost all my crew, leaving me with one guy only to handle all the work. Secondly, he announced a 20% cut in work time, which means 20% cut in pay. He gave us an offer. You can work 7.5 hours a day instead of the 9 hours in our contract, or skip one day a week. We worked Sunday to Thursday. My crew member agreed to cut the daily hours. I, however, decided to cut the day. One thing he neglected to decide is which day I cut. I did ask him, but he just said, "You choose." So I figured it's my decision now. And I decided to take the last day from this week, and the first day the next week, getting me a long 4-day weekend every 2 weeks. It worked nice for a month. My pay was reduced, but I had a lot of free time and I already started using this free time to improve myself and look for another job. At the end of the second month, the boss noticed something odd. The new guy got a call to solve a problem on Thursday and he couldn't figure it out until Monday noon. A long time for a problem to be solved, and the client was not happy. He called my crew in and asked him why the delay happened. The guy said he couldn't fix it and I wasn't available to fix it until Monday. So I get called in afterward. First thing first, why am I not available on my days off? Simple answer, I don't get paid for that, so screw you. Second question, why the long weekend? I explained to him that he gave me the authority to decide, and that is my decision. Richard did not like this. He tried to screw me over and found out that he got screwed back. He claimed it's not right and that I should change the days back, and be available while I am not at work. I asked him if that's a management decision, because if it is, it's 3 strikes against me, and I am entitled to 1 month's salary and full compensation, which at that time was worth another 6 months of salary. He understood that he was royally screwed and withdrew his decision. He didn't give me my day back, so I continued looking, and by the end of the month, I gave my notice. In my notice, I specifically stated the pay cut as my reason to leave, and with the other arguments I constantly had with him the last month, I demanded 6-month compensation as stated in my contract. Richard, of course, refused to budge, but I sent him a formal letter, threatening to sue him. He tried to make things right again and finally offered me my day back. But this was too late, I already had another job with better pay and a slightly better boss. At the end of the month, I finally left. My last crew member was promoted to the assistant manager to fill my position, but they didn't give him a pay raise. He was really angry, and being a better man than me, he quit after only a month, and opened his own business, to directly compete with the old boss. His main target was to harm the old boss, and he succeeded very well. His business grew and he makes good money now. While the old boss had to pick up the pieces of his business, now unable to service his clients. It got a major hit. Last time I checked, he closed the computer lab and shrank the business from 10 people to 3. 2 of them are sales representatives. The next story is called, "You've Taken Too Much Sick Leave." A buddy of mine works at a casino in Australia. This casino has a system going where they monitor your sick days, and if they think you're developing a pattern of sick leave, they write you up for it and watch you like a hawk. Of course, nearly all of the time this pattern is not really accurate, but the management is firm on it, so most of the workers just deal with it. Like my friend, we'll call him Steve. Steve recently took time off because he was, surprise surprise, sick. Well, the casino took exception to that. The fact that Steve kept taking sick leave around his rostered days off meant that he was clearly just trying to have a long time off, and not because he was sick, never mind that Steve provided the doctor's certificates and everything. So Steve gets called to a meeting, where they explain to him that they're now watching him and that he can't take any more sick leave or it's going on official record that he's playing sick. Steve says okay and does not argue with them. One day, about 2 weeks past this meeting, Steve gets extremely sick. Whatever makes a bad day worse, he got it. Steve thinks about calling in sick, but then he remembers. So Steve turns up to work, completely sick. The pit manager initially takes no notice as it's shift swap over time for his dealers and it's very busy. Later though, as he wanders around his pit, he notices Steve, who looks more than slightly off, much paler than even the whitest of his Irish ancestors. The conversation apparently went something like this: "Steve, you look sick, do you need to go home?" No, I've been written up for pattern sick leave, can't take any more. Steve, you look sick, you sound sick, you need to go home. But I can't, I've been warned about taking any more sick leave. Eventually, the pit manager has to call the floor manager down, to make sure that it's on official record that Steve is legitimately sick and won't be reprimanded because he took more sick leave. Steve's still pretty proud of himself for that one. The third story is called, You Want Me to Work for You After That? Back in about 2008, my dad was working for a network company. They provided the backbone for the internet for a lot of companies across the United States. One morning he was working, and his boss's boss calls him into his office. Not a good sign for sure. The boss gives him the standard speech of, sorry, but we're downsizing. He wasn't happy, but things happen. So he signed the paperwork, saying that he no longer works there and he is not allowed to do any sort of work for them. So, he and his now old boss go out to lunch as a goodbye. The boss even told him, half joking, that if he had known this was coming, he could have taken one of the brand new servers that they had dropped off at his desk a couple of days before. They both laughed. They said goodbye and went on their way. Well, I should tell you what my dad did there. He managed all of their core routers across the United States. So, every bit of data across the network went through them. And he was the only one. So, for his entire employment there, he'd always get paged with issues at 3. So, he gets home and starts to relax. Well, about an hour later he gets a call from his boss. The conversation went something like this. Hey big boss, what do you need? It was a bit shorter than he normally would be, but he just got canned. Well, we have a problem up here. What is it? Well, you see, no one here has the root password for the routers. And we need you to give it to us. Well, according to the paperwork I just signed, I'm not allowed to do any work for you, and that would be work. So, tell you what, hire me as a one-time consultant for $10,000 and I'll be more than happy to give it to you. Well, let me get back to you on that. He never heard from them again. For them to get the password, they would have to send out a tech to each router to hook up to it and reset the password, as they can't do it remotely. He got a new job soon after that for about 5 years until he retired for good. He still laughs at them today. The next story is called, Because I Said So, That's Why. This happened a few years ago. I used to be a store manager for a frozen yogurt shop that's part of a larger chain owned by a family. As such, I worked in a store where we had a large walk-in fridge and freezer. We also had a district manager named Jane who had a penchant for ridiculous rules and stern punishments for even the smallest perceived infractions. Once, the power went out to the plaza I worked in and, as such, we had to turn people away because we couldn't dispense products or take payments. I was almost fired for closing in the middle of a workday for that one and was shouted at in front of customers and called incompetent, even with documented proof of being unable to remain open. We also worked alone, which will be important. Anyway, you've got your picture of Jane. She was a joy and a delight. So, one day I was working away before unlocking the doors and went to grab some yogurt from the freezer when the door closed behind me. I pulled the handle, nothing. Hit the plunger, nothing. Locked in the walk-in freezer in jeans and a t-shirt. I, luckily, had my cell phone in my pocket and was able to call a coworker to come let me out. Called Jane, obviously shaken up, and was told, well, don't let the door close. I'll deal with it later. Later turned into 4 months of bothering her because a walk-in freezer that locks from the outside is very dangerous when you work alone. We found solutions to try to keep anyone from becoming stuck, including a sign on the door to never enter without a jacket and your cell phone in case it managed to fall shut. The freezer was very large and the door very heavy. We had 5 more cases of the door slipping and staff becoming stuck before Jane paid a visit to the store. The first thing she did was tear down the sign because it's an eyesore. Then she starts shouting that we should never have our phones while working, for any reason. She left, still no fix in sight, promising to cut hours of anyone caught with phones, even in the freezer. Fast forward another month and one more incident of someone getting locked in and, this time, having to be rescued by a customer who she screamed the backroom lock code at. Jane arrives shortly after opening one day to discuss the freezer. And immediately tears down the new safety sign and starts telling me about how I need to start listening to her and stop being so stubborn. While we're having it out in the back room, the front bell rings to let me know there's a customer. Jane tells me to serve them and that she'll stay and finish up some paperwork before leaving. She makes me show her that my cell phone is in my backpack, because phones are against company policy, you know that. I leave to serve the customers, who turned out to be a softball team on their way to a tournament. About 25 minutes later I was finished with them and was about to quickly mop the tables when I realized I hadn't seen Jane leave, and she usually didn't stay that long. I finished cleaning up and doing some restocking before I heard it. Unmistakable shouting and banging on a door coming from the back room. I put my ear to the door, turned up the store music a few notches and then gave the bathrooms a quick refresh before opening the freezer to find Jane, shaking with a rage and fear combination I'd never seen before, and putting on my best shocked face. "Oh dear. You really can't let the door close. How long were you in there? I wish you'd had your phone so you could call me." The last story is called Pay Rent by the 1st or Vacate. This was like 5 years ago. Everything's fine now. My roommate had suddenly lost his job just before the turn of the month and we knew there was no way we'd make rent. He already had another job lined up, but it would be a couple of weeks before he was paid. It was about 5 days prior to the 1st when we went to go see the property manager. We informed her of the situation and told her we'd pay what we could and even had no problem paying late fees or whatever else was coming our way. We signed a lease and we understood that there would be penalties for missing rent. She didn't want to hear a word we said. She only said that, as per our lease, we were required to pay rent on the 1st of each month. So, we went back to our apartment discouraged and uncertain as to what was going to happen and what we were going to do. I started looking up the local laws on renting and eviction and learned that an eviction takes 30 days in my state, so at least we wouldn't be homeless. We racked our brains for the next few days trying to come up with some way to pay rent, but despite searching through local, state, and federal law, trying to sell a bunch of our stuff, and even trying to borrow some money, we had nothing. It was the last day of the month. I was walking up to our door and saw a piece of paper hanging on it. I assumed it was an eviction notice and was surprised that it was a day early. Luckily for me, it was our ticket out of the apartment. A handwritten note from the property management company rustled slightly in the breeze. It simply read, "Pay rent by the 1st or vacate the property." Signed, the office lady who didn't want to listen to you. Having familiarized myself with local renters' rights over the last few days, I knew that this note counted as a signed document stating we had permission to break the lease and leave the property. We knew we weren't going to pay rent, so we did exactly what she told us to do. We vacated out of that place. In less than 6 hours, we packed up all of our things, threw it in our cars, and found another apartment that gave us 30 days to give them a deposit because we had good credit. She called us the next day and the next ranting about property abandonment and how we owed her rent. But I knew that we only filled 2 of the 3 required criteria for property abandonment, and I explained to her what her note meant from a legal perspective. To this day I have no idea how someone whose job it is to make money off of people in apartments could let this happen. Why did she even leave that note when the very next day she could have posted an eviction notice? Part of me wants to think that she did it on purpose to help us out, but she was not that kind of person for that to be true. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content. Let me know what you think about the stories in the comment section below. Have a great day. Bye bye.